This recording is going to focus on quantitative observation. If you're interested in qualitative observation, there is a separate recording that focuses on that, but this is the one that is about quantitative observation techniques. So with quantitative observation, this focuses on what we call literal data, factual data, and especially data that's numeric, so things that we can count. So I've given some examples there, so number of people in the bar queue at a festival, place where people are like to sit in a restaurant, so you can actually make observations, and understand which are the popular seats, how many drinks people order, or things like the number of cars in a destination car park. So these are things that you can count, and you can count them over time. So for instance, you can look at numbers of cars in a destination car park and at what point it gets full, different days of the week, different times of the year. And also you can do things like looking at that in relation to weather. So in the UK, the number of cars in a destination car park is quite often fairly weather dependent. And therefore you can kind of build up a picture of when you're going to likely to need to open an overfill car park, for instance, because it's a sunny day, there's going to be lots of people there. And that's when, what sort of thing that we might learn from that kind of data. So quantitative observation, it's a very structured observation, so it generally focuses on frequencies of actions, usually over a particular time period. One of the challenges with it, it's not always easy to be objective about what you're measuring. So for example, I many years ago did some structured observations in an urban park setting, where we were looking at the different leisure activities that people were doing, and we were looking at how these varied over different days of the week and different times of the day, and in relation to things like weather conditions. But it was actually quite challenging to be very structured and objective in this approach, and to actually understand what different people were doing in different places. So, there are some limitations sometimes in terms of what you can actually see and understand. But, it was still fairly successful. There was also electronic means we can do it. So, for instance, if you can actually do observations on things like websites, because you can actually look at things like website hits if you've got access to the data behind them. And also, increasingly smartphones. So there are actually now tools that and apps that I believe students can download that can actually compile some data for you. But certainly research projects have sometimes built their own smartphone apps to compile data that might observe where people are travelling, for example. So there have been ones that I've used, one in tourism, for example, to find out where people were going on a daily basis. There's other things like store cards. So it might not be relevant to many of you here, but obviously things like the big stores all have their own cards. So Tesco's have a club card, for example, and that mops up all the data about people shopping. And actually, I think Tesco's know more about what I'm buying than I do. And I'm pretty sure they know when I need cat food, for instance, because they've been recording what I'm purchasing, and then they know when I'm likely to run out. So they've actually, revolutionised retail insofar as retail can target offers to people now to get them into their stores. There's other things like CCTV, so closed circuit television, which records places. And if you can get access to that kind of data, that can, compile data, or you can compile data from that on, where numbers of people in places. We've also very successfully used the data that is collected by speed cameras on roads. So some of my research is quite travel and transport focused. And we collected data around the Olympics in London, where they hosted some of the sailing events at Weymouth, and we got the data from the traffic cameras there, which recognises people's number plates, and from that we compiled data on numbers of movements and different times of the day. And one of the things that we discovered, which was quite interesting as a mechanism for potentially looking at congestion, was that some people pass the speed camera every day at almost exactly the same time, within about a minute's variance. And actually this was quite interesting for the local authorities because they could potentially look at these routine people, and if they didn't pass on that day, that would give them some insight as to whether there was traffic congestion in other parts of the system where they didn't have cameras. Another thing we can have is automated visitor counts. So these are used quite a lot in tourism, countryside recreation. They can be used at sports events where you've got turnstiles that allow people to enter, count people in, count people out. There's all sorts of ways that automated visitor counters can be used. And you can, of course, do it in person using an observation schedule. And I've also mentioned online. I've actually had a number of students who've done quantitative observations of social media. So particularly if you want to measure the level of engagement with, for instance, a social media post, you can look at the numbers of likes, the numbers of shares, the number of comments. And there are formulae out there to sort of use those to calculate a measure of engagement or measure of relative engagement comparing one post to another on social media. So again, you can quantify things there. You could also quantify other things on social media, like numbers of times there are people in images. So if you're looking at tourism and posts about tourism, maybe by tourists, you could look at the number of times they have people in there, the number of the times they have destination images. You could count the different types of destination images that people choose to share. So, things you could think about doing there. So in terms of the practicalities, you need to develop some kind of observation schedule. It's quite a structured observation tool, so it might look at things like what, how, who, how many, how long for, but you will need something that enables you to capture the data that you're interested in. But potentially very useful, and actually I think quite often overlooked as an approach in student projects.